Hey everybody, this is Blake here, and welcome to my review of Jupiter Ascending, the newest film by the Wachowski siblings. So, you would think this big budgeted science fiction action flick coming out in the dead of February would be something I'd really anticipate, even if my expectations are not among the highest. Uh, and yet, going into this, I could care less. In fact, I actually would have preferred to watch The Seventh Son first, even though I hear that is a lot worse. Um, just because it looked more entertaining to me, it just unfortunately wasn't playing at a convenient time. So I figured I might as well get Jupiter Ascending out of the way. But the problem was that the trailer both underwhelmed and annoyed me, and I'll get into what parts bothered me about the trailer and why when I start talking about the movie. But also, I'm not a big fan of the Wachowskis. I actually think they're very, very, very overrated. Now, I don't think they're bad directors. Sometimes I have to resist the urge to call them hacks because I don't think that's true. They can at least deliver in terms of spectacle. They're always trying to push boundaries, and almost all of their films are really ambitious. They're trying to make really good movies. They're not just like your Roland Emmerichs or your Michael Bays who just really feel like they're catering to the masses in order to make a profit. No, like for the most part, I can't call any of the Wachowskis' films lazy, except The Invasion. But I don't even think they had a major hand in that. I think they just were brought in to do some rewrites. But otherwise, yeah, I really do respect inspiration and ambition, even if the film itself isn't really good. Laziness is the worst crime a movie can commit in my eyes. And yeah, I just don't really like how they do things. So they'll have a hit like The Matrix, which overrated, but it's still a good movie or a good action film. And then they follow that up with what, The Matrix Reloaded. It was alright. But then Matrix Revolutions was kind of a bomb, and it definitely sucked. So then what it seems like they like to do is they'll hide in the producer's seat. They'll make something like V for Vendetta in order to win the crowds back, but because they're not the directors and yet the marketing is going to push their names so heavily, they pretty much get all the credit for that movie, while the director, is still a nobody even after that film was a pretty solid success. Nobody remembers that director's name. And then, they come back and they'll make something like Speed Racer, and that flopped and wasn't very well received, even though it has developed a cult following. And I really do not like that movie, but I understand its appeal to certain viewers. So then once again, since that movie failed, they hide back in the producer's chair, and same marketing campaign, except then they make Ninja Assassin, which ironically I probably like more than all of their movies, and that film fails. And then the director gets blamed, and the Wachowskis, just shrug it off as if they had no involvement at all. Granted, some people point out that the Wachowskis wrote V for Vendetta, but at the same time, they had a major hand in the development of Ninja Assassin. In fact, they're responsible for that script being rushed. So that gets on my nerves. And then, of course, they followed that up with Cloud Atlas, which I didn't care for, but once again, it tried. It wasn't my kind of movie to begin with, and I think it was maybe overambitious, but it tried. And I don't think they actually followed that up with something they merely produced. So then, a couple years later, we have Jupiter Ascending, which is supposed to be their big return to form. And I really didn't care for it. It's not bad. It's acceptable as just a blockbuster fluff. It's reasonably entertaining, but only on a surface level. And yet at the same time, it suffers from all the problems that plague the Wachowskis. Well, I think above everything, my problem with Jupiter Ascending was that it reminded me way too much of other films. And I felt kind of bad for it because this is one of those movies where I started to wonder if I have just seen way, way too many films because I was watching it with my father and he enjoyed it more than I did. But he doesn't have as good of a memory as I do when it comes to cinema. So, he was fine with all of it. He thought all the ideas were creative and he thought they were well executed. But I just kept, like, once again, going back to other movies where I saw something similar. Like, Channing Tatum's character has this shield attached to his arm. That's kind of cool, except I already saw that in Elysium, and Elysium, maybe it wasn't the first film to actually do something like that, but it's the only other one I could think of. So if that wasn't the first film that used that kind of idea, that just goes to show how cliched it has become by the time we got to Jupiter Ascending. And then other parts were just weird. Like there was this one shot at the end where Channing Tatum's fighting this giant lizard dude, and this lizard dude tries to hit him with his wing, and he ducks, and it reminded me of Legion for some reason, as if anybody remembers Legion. And then when Mila Kunis is getting married, they have her dressed up like the princess or queen from Episode 1 of Star Wars. Why would they go out of their way to remind us of Episode 1? I don't know. Maybe Episode 1 wasn't even the first. Maybe it's because I think it is based off, I don't know, an Asian wedding custom, but it still reminded me of that. And that was the entire movie, is I could not just sit and enjoy Jupiter Ascending for what it was. It just kept making me think of other better and worse films. So that sort of killed any momentum this movie could have generated for me, just because it felt just so conventional. In terms of the script, it's weird because I'd say the storyline is both way too convoluted, but at the same time it's also very safe and familiar in certain areas. So for example, Mila Kunis, she's a maid who wants something more, and of course she gets brought into this, big intergalactic storyline where it turns out she's royalty, and you have that clash where, she's kind of clumsy and is a bit too down to earth compared to, these more sophisticated, royal people, typical Princess Diaries type situation. And of course she falls in love with the rogue, mercenary or whatever he was, who's real badass, real strong, but at the same time he's kind of emotionally weak. So they're inevitably going to fall in love just because cliches require them to do so, even though once again I felt no substance there. I felt no real reason to care for their relationships or even their characters, because they're very standard archetypes when you think about it. I will say this though, I did like how she does a lot more in terms of the action and the ending than what you usually would see out of that kind of character. But still very standard stuff, especially for the Wachowskis. Yet there's all these various characters whom I really didn't feel the film needed, even though occasionally they were charming. There's just way too much going on in this movie. Way too many people with their way too many agendas. And honestly, I had difficulty keeping up because the dialogue is really fast-paced. It doesn't let you process any of this information while it's delivering it. It just has somebody give this overlong, quick speech that's supposed to clue us in, and then they move on to the next thing, and then they'll come back to that later on. So I just felt like I was jumping back and forth, maybe because my hearing isn't all that great and I could have really used subtitles. But one of my issues with the Wachowskis is I feel they tend to overcomplicate their dialogue. Nobody talks like a real person would talk. They have to sound as poetic or as cute as possible. One of the things that really bugged me about the trailer was that stupid, quite frankly, I have more in common with a dog than I have with you. And then she's like, I love dogs. That made me cringe whenever the trailer would show that sequence. And there is a little bit more of a context here for the actual movie, but it still got on my nerves. The only difference is they draw attention to how stupid that line is. And really felt like that was sort of a running joke where the Wachowskis may have even been making fun of themselves, because once again the dialogue is just so over the top, but occasionally they'll kind of lampshade that, where somebody will say something very convoluted and it's all gibberish, and then they'll be like, oh, okay, well, I heard two words out of that. And to me, though, making fun of yourself for a flaw doesn't make that flaw any less prominent. So, as always, I found myself either being kind of just befuddled by the dialogue or annoyed by it. Now, some might actually look at or listen to this dialogue and think that it's very deep and meaningful and clever. If you feel that way, then good for you. There is a reason why the Wachowskis do continue to hold quite a bit of respect. They're not like M. Night Shyamalan, who, fell really hard to where people think of him more for The Last Airbender than for Sixth Sense. No, when people think of the Wachowskis, including myself, we think of The Matrix, where their weaknesses and strengths just happen to align and make a pretty good movie. Here, their weaknesses tended to dominate their strengths, but I understand that it's very subjective, and since I'm not the biggest Wachowski mark, if you do like them much more than I do, you might respond to this movie more positively. I felt some of the casting was off. Mila Kunis did alright. She concerned me at first, but I thought she handled this material pretty well. Channing Tatum, this is just not his kind of movie. They needed somebody more, naturally charismatic and, I don't want to say suave, but somebody like a young Harrison Ford who can be charming even though he's not, the most expressive person, or like a young Clint Eastwood would have worked. I don't know who could have played this role now. That's one of the biggest problems with stars these days, is they get pushed primarily for their looks or their comedic timing and not anything else. But Channing Tatum, he is a very good comedic actor, but he's not a very good dramatic one, and I found him to be utterly boring in this role. Sean Bean just seemed kind of bored. The main bad guy, I can't think of his name, Eric Redglave? I could be wrong about that. But I thought he was just too hammy and too over the top, which contrasts some of the other performances, which are just a bit too reserved, like Sean Bean's. And then other people did fine, but I thought some of the casting choices were just a bit odd and wasteful. But what can you do? The acting wasn't bad. It didn't necessarily sink the movie for me, although it could have helped save it. Geez, what else? Oh yeah, the action scenes. The Wachowskis, they know how to do that. Special effects, I didn't have any issue with them. They were usually really good, sometimes even phenomenal. Like, sometimes my issue with films like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is that they feel so small in scale compared to similar other movies that have come out around the same time, like Transformers or the Marvel films. Whether they're better than or worse, I want my action films to really stand out. And this film, it got pretty epic at times, and I did like the designs, even if they weren't particularly original. There was still more put into them than what your traditional summer blockbuster would deliver. I did think that it moved too fast-paced, or just the action would go by so quickly that it's often hard to keep up, much like with some of the dialogue. But I was never bored, even though this movie is a little bit long, and I can't really say I was invested in the storyline. It never goes too long without an action scene, and they were above average. So I'm not calling Jupiter Ascending a failure. It's just not a real success. That's all I really have to say about this movie. To me, it was just average. But if you want to see it, then be my guest. So that is all I have to say. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please follow me on Facebook and Twitter. I've done written reviews of The Woman in Black, a re-review technically, and something else. I can never remember to bring up my stupid website whenever I do these videos, and I can never remember what I just posted. But I'm sure there are other reviews on there that you would be happy to look at, so please do so. I'll have my worst movies of 2014 video released probably sometime next week. And I shall see you guys later.